Okay, I hope you can see. Okay, muchas gracias por su invitación to este muy importante congreso. Mi capacidad de hablar español es muy limitada, porque tengo que dar mi presentación en inglés. So me profundamente aprecio para mi presentación en inglés. Okay, so I have 7 minutes in making presentation. So I'm going to talk about the challenges that many countries in Asia faced, and namely Japan, China, Korea, and Taiwan. And just like Argentina, which went through the military dictatorship. And many of those countries went through the fascism, military dictatorship, or the leaders of the country disliked lay participation. So there are all kinds of challenges. So briefly, I'm going to talk about those challenges of each country and also hopefully give some basic information about how those countries achieved in introducing the lay participation system. First of all, Japan. Japan used to have a jury system from 1928 to 1943. That's when the Japanese fascism was quite strong. And eventually, that led to the suspension of the jury system. So after the end of the Second World War, many progressive Japanese lawyers, young students, and civil rights activists pushed the Japanese government to open up the possibility of reintroducing the jury system. But it took almost 80 years, close to 80 years, for the Japanese government to agree that lay participation is necessary. But unfortunately, this lay participation system, which was introduced 2009, was not the American style all citizen jury system, but it was a mixed tribunal. Like the system that the Provincia de Córdoba introduced 2005. They had the 3 professional judges, they had the 6 lay judges. So that's a Japanese system. So still, many Japanese, progressive lawyers and civil rights activists pushing Japan to reintroduce the American style, the jury system. Korea went through the similar atrocities, which lasted until 1987. They went through horrendous military dictatorship. So it's only 30-some years. The Korean government began to introduce the democratic measures. So it took almost 20 years after Korea became the country with democratic ideals. 2008, they introduced the all-citizen jury system. And so instead of 12 members, they have like a 5, 7, and 9 jurors, depending upon the severity of the penalty. The size of the jury panel varied. So that's the Korean style after many years of military dictatorship. The People's Republic of China, they went through civil war. And they also Japanese, the colonial policies. And they became independent 1949. And 5 years later, 1954, they had a constitution. But the Mao, who is the leader of the Communist Party, disliked the lay participation. And despite the fact that the constitution had the provision of lay participation, but because of his disfavor of lay participation, it took almost exactly 50 years for the China to introduce the lay participation system called lay assessors. It's not the American style jury system. It's a 1 judge and 2 lay citizens, lay judges. And 3 years ago, they modified the system so that the only college graduate were eligible to serve. But 3 years ago, the new Lay Judge Act allowed the high school graduates to participate as lay judges. And they also introduced also a civil lay judge system at the same time. And so from 2018 to 2020, almost 20% of all civil cases in China. Remember, China has 1.4 billion people living in that country, but 20% of all civil cases are being adjudicated by civil lay assessors. And they also introduced a grand jury system called the people's supervisors. And so those are randomly selected Chinese people are to actually to check the possible corruptions of the government officials. And so the China is kind of unique, introduced the grand jury system to monitor any collusions or corruptions among government officials. That was a key element of the Xi Jinping's the new democratic measures. As a result, and as you know, the China becoming more of a democratic state, despite all kinds of adversities. So by the end of last year, they lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty. So that's part of the democratizations, not only in the judicial areas, but also economic areas. Taiwan is the same way. They went through the tremendous challenges. They had the 4 decades of martial law. Can you imagine? 4 decades of martial law. It was lifted, so 1987. And so finally, the current president, Tsai Ing-wen, became president, and she suggested the introduction of the American-style jury system. And Lay Judge Act just passed last year. And this system is a Japanese style mixed tribunal, 3 professional judges and 6 lay judges. It's going to start January 1st, 2023. And anyone 23 years old and over are allowed to participate in this. So this is the new system being introduced in Taiwan after many decades of the horrendous government policy and of the martial law. And lastly, I want to talk about a little bit about the Japanese grand jury system. After many years of the fascism, Japanese government, with the support of the many progressive lawyers, as well as the young students, and as well as a compromise with the US occupying force immediately after the Second World War. Remember, Japan was occupied by the US and Allied forces after Japan declared complete surrender and the defeat of the Second World War. And this grand jury prosecution is quite unique because it checks the prosecutorial decision-making, which is quite unique system. No other country has introduced this system. So I'm in the kind of mission to propagate about the importance of possible introduction of this prosecution review commission grand jury system, that the ordinary citizens actually oversee how the prosecutions make decision. Okay, those are kind of supervisory responsibility of the Japanese citizens in checking any abuse made by the prosecution. So, anyway, so it's 8 minutes. If you have any questions, and I'm happy to respond.
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
How did they come up with the number 11 for the civil grand jury system?
Well, this is a compromise. What happened? This was created in 1948. It was created out of a compromise between US-led Allied forces. They tried to put some citizen-led system to place a check over prosecution, because the prosecution had a tremendous power over citizens. Any citizens complain about the, say, government policy in 1930s and 1940s. They are being arrested, they're being tortured. Oftentimes they were actually being killed. Or they were actually tried in a secret tribunal. They've been tortured, they've been killed. And exactly that's what happened in many countries under military dictatorship. And I'm sure it happened in Argentina from 1970s, 1980s. So US wants to introduce the grand jury system, US style. Japan, that's 16 to 23 members. Japan resisted. So this was a compromise of the Japanese as well as the US negotiation.
I was
came
just
up
interested
with
in the number of 11 jurors rather than 12 or 6. I mean, we're always playing with those numbers, and I thought maybe there was some reason they chose 11. I'm not sure.
It was simply a compromise.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. So it's nice to have a system of citizen supervision over prosecution, because prosecution has a tremendous power in any country. So this Japanese grand jury system is something that the maybe Argentina may be interested in looking into, hopefully sometime in the future. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Miguel. Great question. And our response to your great question is the fact that if you look at the decision making by the prosecutors, they have the power to indict people. But if you think the reverse side of the power, the prosecutors also have a power not to indict people. And if you look at the decision making made by the prosecutors, people that the prosecutors refuse to indict, especially in the case of Japan, tend to be people, those people are either high-ranking politicians, those are high-ranking government bureaucrats, and also the people with extreme wealth, including we call the economic elites, those people who own multiple corporations. And so those are the people that prosecutors are reluctant to prosecute or reluctant to issue indictment. So what the Japanese grand jury, this PRC, does is to examine the cases in which prosecutors refuse to indict. In other way of saying, those 11 people randomly chosen from the community will examine, upon request by the citizens, the authenticity of the prosecutorial non-indictment decision, right? And so since 2009, this PRC, the Japanese grand jury, now has the power to reverse the prosecutorial non-indictment decision and then forward with the prosecution. And there are a number of cases for the past 10 years. Like, for example, everyone have heard the Fukushima nuclear plant explosion, right? And millions of people have to flee Fukushima to other regions. And through the investigations that the prosecutors refused to indict the company that operated the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So prosecutors issued non-indictment decision. And then the citizen raised the issue that the no-indictment decision should be reviewed. So this PRC, after reviewing all the evidence, decided to reverse the no-indictment and then forward with the prosecution. So those three people, the top CEOs of the Tokyo Electric Power Company, was put on trial. Unfortunately, from the victim's point of view, the professional judges decided they were not guilty. But nonetheless, the PRC, this Japanese grand jury, has the power to evaluate the decisions made by prosecution and can reverse their no-indictment decision. So that's tremendous power. So that's how it operates. Gracias. I just want to add to what Nikolai's excellent response to the, say, diversity of the jury. And I did extensive study about the people's perceptions of what's fair and what's legitimate based on the contextuality of the jury. So I found over and over the racially diverse jury, or a sexually diverse jury, or genderly diverse jury are more likely to be perceived as legitimate, even more, much fairer than, say, monoracial or monogender or monosex jury. And it's been proven. And diversity of the jury has been used historically. If you look at about 2,000 years ago, in Roman Empire and Roman peripheries, they used a system called the recuperatores. Maybe my pronunciation is not very good because I don't speak Italian, but recuperatores is the system that has been adopted in the Roman peripheries, the regions which had been under the Roman rule, and that allowed the participation of the local people along with the Roman citizens. So you have a mixed citizenship in adjudicating the conflict resolution. And the same thing happened in 12th century and 13th century England, for in the system of the jury de mediate linguae, that's in Latin, means a jury of half cultures. For in the Jewish people being accused of crime, then the jury trial would be being composed of 6 Jewish jurors and the 6 non-Jewish jurors. So, and the same system had adopted in northeastern regions in the United States until the end of the 19th century. So the use of the jurado indígena in Argentina is quite historical. At the same time, it has its historical precedence. And I wish we have the same system here in the United States. Like right now, we have 2 trials. The Kyle Rittenhouse, the white, self-declared white suprematist, killed people who participated in the Black Lives Matter demonstration, democratic demonstration. And he's now being tried by the jury, which include only 1 Black. And the 3 people who murdered Ahmaud Arbery in Florida. And Ahmaud Arbery was African-American, killed by 3 white people. The jury trial included the 1 Black juror. So I wish we have this racially diverse jury, like the ones you have, like a jurado indígena, adopted here in the United States, so that at least we have representation of people from different racial groups. So Argentina is far ahead in a democracy, in its articulation, in the judicial decision-making system, I believe.